My people, my grade school fam, my color crew. What's going on with y'all? Happy damn Friday. I'm excited to see everybody. Who's in the house? I want to get into a better habit of doing something that Darren just did instinctively when he made his special surprise guest appearance on Grade School a couple weeks ago, where I actually want to go back and start looking at the chat and seeing who's here. I've gotten spoiled and I rely too much on Gadali and Raf, and they get to have all the fun with you guys, and I'm just up here answering questions. But let's see who's actually out there. Darren's in the house, of course. Amazing. I know Gadali's here with me. Gadali's my co-host with the most. EC Sanka. Who else? Eric. Joel's in the house. Rafa's here. All right. We're going to have a good sesh today. Hope you guys are doing awesome. I'm doing really good. As you guys know or may know, I've recently changed studios. As you may also know or not know, I am what my mom calls a nester by nature. I really need my nest in order to function optimally. So I always find moving and changing space to be a very exciting opportunity to sort of like rebuild things nice and clean from the ground up and get them the way I want. But I'm also sort of on edge and like not very efficient until I get my nest built. My nest is almost built here in the room that I'm in now, so I'm very excited about that. And it's a beautiful thing. And that's kind of what's going on in my world. Doing color grading, making looks, doing all my normal stuff. I hope you guys are having a great week as well. We got a great session planned for today, but before I dive in, I just want to talk about a couple of announcements real quick here. So you may have gotten a newsletter from me this week if you signed up for the wait list for my upcoming comprehensive color grading course that we're going to be doing in June, or if you've grabbed any of my freebies or purchased anything from my store, my Elements LUTs, my book, etc. Hope you got an email from me this week where I talked about how getting paid to do my art has really allowed me to not only do my art, but to do everything else that really matters to me in my life. So there's, like basically being able to practice my art on a professional scale has not only provided my livelihood and, like the creature comforts and material things that come with that. That's awesome. But it's also provided me things that are just as important to me. Things like the opportunity to grow personally and to really cultivate the habits and, like hobbies and things that I find to be most fulfilling. It's given me time to spend time with my family. I get to work from home most of the time, and I get to hang out with my wife and with my new baby, and I wouldn't trade that for the world. There's no other professional arrangement that I would really be as happy with as that for the moment. So I talked a lot about the different things that making my passion, my profession, has done for me and how important that is to me. And one of the reasons I sent out that email that you may have gotten this week is I want to gauge where you guys are at in terms of whether you want to pursue color grading professionally. And if you want to let me know in the chat as well, do you want to be a professional colorist? Are you already grading professionally? Do you want to try to get bigger jobs, or are you just doing this as more of a hobby or as something to complement another aspect of to complement another profession that's sort of adjacent, like, content creation or something like that? Let me know in the chat. I'd love to hear from you guys here, kind of like where you're at with those things, because all these answers help me to create content and give you guys information that's going to be the most valuable to you. So let me know. If you fall into one of those first two categories of wanting to do color grading professionally or take your professional practice to the next level, that color grading course that I mentioned a couple minutes ago is starting in June. It's going to be 4 days long, and we're going to spend nearly an entire day, almost 25% of the course, talking about the business aspect of color grading. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that today as well, in terms of looking at the overall kind of like flow of the way that I handle a project from start to finish, not just creatively, but in terms of logistics and finances, negotiations, all that stuff. So we're going to be doing kind of a hybrid of talking about the grading and technical workflow, but also the business practices today, which I think is going to be really fun. But we're going to be talking a ton about that in this course because my goal for this course is for you to finish it, regardless of wherever you're coming in. I want you to finish it with the ability to make a project, even at a modest budget, look really good and to make margin, to make money, even on a project that may not have the biggest budget in the world. If you can make money on those smaller budget projects, you'll find it really easy to make money on the larger budget projects. And that's going to lead to all the results that I talked about a couple minutes ago of just getting to have a really, really fun livelihood and a lifestyle around that livelihood that allows you to live the way that you want to live, because we all deserve to do that. And it just takes a little bit of focus and a little bit of patience in order to get there. So that's really my goal on the broadest scale for this course coming up in June, is to equip you guys with the tools that I wish I'd had at the beginning of my journey with those things, and that I have found to be the most effective in cultivating that livelihood and that lifestyle. So that's the main thing I wanted to talk about there. And then, just kind of on that note, a couple of the bonuses that we're going to include that are going to fill out that business side of things. I'm going to provide you a bunch of templates and forms and, documents that you can use to help figure out that business side of things. So I'm talking about a prep sheet that says like, hey, I want you to hand me your assets in this way. We'll talk more about prep sheets in a couple of minutes. I'm going to talk about bidding templates. We'll talk about invoices. We'll talk about basic contracts. Those are all things that I'm going to have packaged and ready to go for you guys as a part of this course. So I'm really excited about it, as I've been sharing in the next couple of weeks, and there's going to be more and more info to come. And we are not currently open for enrollment yet, but we will be very soon. And if you want to get on the wait list and be the first to know when we do open, definitely sign up for that wait list via the link here in the description for the video. And the last thing that I'll mention there is we're going to actually have a workshop with my business manager, the person who manages Cullen Kelly Color and keeps me straight, helps me figure out where to focus and how to tackle all the stuff that I'm talking about. He's actually going to hold a workshop, and it's going to take you even further into the strategy and the skills that you need to know to build a reliable business and really to help yourself be an innovator and a leader in this industry. So lots and lots of really fun stuff coming up in that course on the business front, as well as on the creative and the technical and the technique front as well. So lots of fun stuff there. Looking forward to sharing more and more and seeing you guys all in that course, at least the first 100 or so of you, or the first 100 exactly, who we can get in, because we are limiting it to 100, as I've said before, because I want us to have an opportunity to all connect and not just be a massive group of people with no connection between us. What else? Update to my free Kodak 2383 print film emulation LUT that works great in color managed workflows. That came out a couple weeks ago, the V2 of it. Sounds like you guys are loving it. Keep the feedback coming. Let me know how it's feeling compared to the V1. Sounds like thus far, everyone's sort of reaction is what mine is as well. Wow, this is so much better. It's all at once, like, not a massive change because a lot of the contrast and baseline character is the same, but some of the most important things in a look, like the way skin tones are rendered and the way that kind of primary colors are coming through, really seem to be improved with V2 here. So go download it, check it out if you haven't already. Let me know what you think of it. And as always, that LUT and the other goodies that I have available for free are linked in the description here, and you can grab those by following that link. And there's all kinds of fun stuff in there. There's my mid-gray cheat sheet, my exposure chart, DCTL, lots of other fun stuff. So get in there and grab those things if you haven't already. And that's all I got to say about all of that. Let's talk about the matter at hand. Let's sort of frame the conversation that I want to have with you guys today. We've talked in the past about my creative workflow and my collaborative workflow with clients. We've talked in the past about the business side of running a color grading business and some sort of best practices on that front. What I want to do today is kind of combine those things and just take a really bird's eye view of the entire process from, like that first email or phone call or text message or whatever coming in of like, hey, you want to color grade a thing? All the way out to delivering that thing. And most importantly, as we just got done talking about, getting paid for it and everyone feeling really happy about the end result and feeling like they've gotten a great value out of the deal and that there's been a really awesome transaction, an awesome exchange of value made, and that everyone kind of feels that way. So I want to focus on anything that falls under that umbrella today. Creative grading is going to be part of that, but that's sort of like the only one of the items that I want to talk about today. I want to talk about how we have those conversations, how we make our deals, how we negotiate and coordinate the logistics and get things prepped in and ready to go for the actual grade, and then how we deliver things as well. So all that stuff is fair play. And I've got a couple of ideas that I can share with you guys initially, but you can start to think about questions that you have on this subject, or if you've already got them prepared after the post that I made yesterday, then we can start with those as well. And Gadali, I'm just curious, do we have anything out there yet, questions-wise, on this topic?
No questions yet. Just a lot of people chiming in about their color experience and journey so far.
Okay, good deal. Good deal. Yeah, so let's start here, guys. Let's talk about the way that every job begins, every project begins when you're working as a colorist, because it's something that, like, I don't know. I wish someone had talked to me about what to expect, what to look for, what to watch out for when I began my career. So let's think about the way it all begins. First of all, how does the job actually come in? How does the project begin? And that's sort of the focus of an entire other grade school that we could do some time of, like, hey, how do you get yourself noticed and get people calling you and get people knocking down the door and saying, I gotta have Cullen to grade my thing. No one else will do. When can you do it? How can we work together? That's such an important thing to cultivate, and we can talk about principles for that as well. But let's assume that you've done an amazing job of that and you're in demand and people are knocking down your door left and right. What do you do from the moment that you get that initial contact, right? Here's the first thing that I want you guys to think about. This is kind of a principle, and again, connects to some of the business principles that we've talked about in prior episodes of grade school. The hardest thing that I've found over the years is not what you do, but what you don't do when you get that initial email. And it's not what you say, but what you don't say when you get that initial email. It says, hey, whatever it is, like, I saw your work on this website and I thought it was really great. Or my friend so-and-so worked with you and they had a great experience. I'd love to work with you. I have a project. Would you like to grade it? Right? It's going to be some form of that. I have a project. Are you interested? It's going to be, however it comes, it's going to be something of that sort of essence there. The toughest thing at that juncture, at least it was for me for many years, was to avoid my first impulse to say, yes, when can we start? You get so excited because that's what we're trying to do when we are professional colorists, right? We want to get paid. We want to book jobs in. We want to do work. And especially if you're at the beginning or the middle of your career, you're trying to build up that portfolio. You're just so excited to be working because, as we all know, it's a privilege to make your passion your profession. And it's a privilege to be valuable and in demand. And it's really exciting to feel that starting to happen. So my impulse for many years was to go, yes, when do we start? Let's do it. Absolutely. That's actually the worst possible thing that you can do for the health of that job, for the health of the collaboration. It's a terrible impulse that we really have to temper. Why is that? Well, first of all, I want you to think about it this way. That first conversation that you're going to have that leads up to, okay, cool, I can pay that much for this work and I can provide the prep to you in this way and these deliverables will work for me and we can do it on this time frame. All of those details that make the essence of the deal for a particular color grading project, that's not just like a barrier. That's not just like a thing in the way that you need to get past as quickly as possible so that you can do the grade. That's actually your first collaboration with this client. That's going to set the tone for your creative collaboration later. If you can be creative in that collaboration, if you can understand one another's needs and find a way to have everyone's needs be met in a compelling way, you've laid the ideal foundation for a really successful color grade. But if you do anything other than that, then you're starting on less than optimal footing when you get into the creative color grade. So this is all a way of saying that for me, the initial response is almost always going to be some variation of the following, where they'll say, hey, Cullen, I love your work, or my friend referred me, or maybe we've worked together in the past, whatever it is. Can we do this project together? Are you interested in doing this project? And my response is always the same. It's to express enthusiasm and say, yes, let's work that out. Let's build this deal. Let's collaborate to figure out how we're going to put together a really compelling deal that works for all parties. But even though that's enthusiastic and seems similar to saying yes, it's very different from saying yes. I'm not committing to doing your project because when I say yes, that means, okay, so whatever money you offer me, I guess that means I have to take, right? And whatever timeline you have, I guess that means I have to take. and however many rounds of revisions that you want, however much work you want me to put into this, whatever stuff you want me to do on the side, like cleaning things up or adding graphics or generating final deliverables, or, oh, we got the new mix, can you cut in the new mix for the timeline? I'm kind of implicitly agreeing to all that stuff when I say yes. And take it from me, you don't want to implicitly agree to anything that you can't bill for. So the first step there is to say, I would love to work with you again, or I would love to work with you for the first time. Let's put together an amazing deal that is a great win for all of us. And that's where the negotiation comes in, which is, again, something we've talked about in the essential business skills episodes of grade school. But that's where, I would work on putting together an estimate. I would work on, like looking at the material and figuring out, what are you going to get out of this as a colorist? There's the old saying that there's you do one for the meal and one for the reel. Is this one for your meal, or is this one for your reel? Meaning, is this just something that's going to keep the lights on, or is this going to be a prestige piece that you can put on your social media and put on your reel and really help you to promote your creative skills? Or could it possibly be both? Those jobs do come, and when they do, that's a different value prop than when it's just one or the other. So that's, kind of assessing like, all right, what am I working with here? What am I going to get out of this? Am I going to get some money out of this? Am I going to get, some prestige out of this? Am I going to get both? And then for them, what are they looking to get out of it? That's another really key question that I didn't ask for many years, but I've really taken to almost as a rule, asking every time a project begins, especially with a new client. What's your number one goal for this color grade? Because that answer is going to vary wildly, I've found over the years. Some people are like, oh, I feel like the color shifts are like all over the place, and I just don't want it to color shift. And they really just want someone who's going to correct their image. Or it might be that they're like, I just want it to look like the references or like the treatment that I wrote for the thing. I just want to get it lined up and, working, kind of in alignment with that. Other times you're going to have people who are all about like, I want a look. I want a really, really great look. I want it to look like a film print, or I want it to look like this show that I love, whatever it is. But the answers vary wildly, and that's going to give you a really good clue as to how to budget your time and to how to spend your time when you get into the actual color grade. So it's a great question to start with there. But all of this is to say that initial conversation is a negotiation, it's a collaboration, and it's something that you want to take your time with. You want to resist that impulse to just say yes to the job, and instead make sure that you've got a crystal clear idea in your mind of like, all right, I'm going to do A, B, and C on this timeline, and as my compensation for that, I'm going to get back X, Y, and Z. And that compensation can be monetary, and it can be explicit with the client, or it can be something that you have just sort of like inventoried on your own end and said like, all right, maybe they're not paying me all the money in the world. Maybe they've got kind of a tight deadline, but I'm going to get a really good piece of material for my reel out of it, for example. And by the way, that's something else that you can negotiate for up front so that you're not having to ask permission later. Like, gee, is it okay if I post this on social media now that we're done? There's nothing wrong with that. But if you can have the conversation up front and say, hey, like, it can be a great negotiation point the moment someone asks you to extend them a deal or be generous with your time or your rate. Say, sure, can you do me a favor? And as soon as this is good to go, just let me know so that I can put it up on my social media and promote my business. That's an easy thing that anyone's going to say yes to at that point. It doesn't have quite the same reaction I've found over the years when you reach out afterwards and you're like, hey, can I, is this ready for me to post on my social media? Like, sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, sure, go ahead. Sometimes they'll say, oh, well, no, let's hold off on that a bit. It's another negotiation point that you can kind of make up front that I strongly encourage. So that's kind of your initial point of engagement, where you want to resist that very first impulse to just blindly say yes, and instead treat it as what it is, which is your first collaboration on this project with this client, and make it a great collaboration. Make it one that is going to foreshadow the creative collaboration to come. And if you can do that, then you're off to a great start. And we can talk kind of from here about the way that I like to ask for prep to come in and the way that I like to prep jobs, and kind of points onward from there. I'll take a quick breather and see if any questions have come up in the meanwhile.
Yeah, a couple questions here. Let's see. Jim Robinson is here saying that in forums and such, the number one question on working with clients is how to present it for the clients when you can't see what they're seeing. what's the best approach to this problem? Like Frame IO, Vimeo, sending them an iPad, etc.
Yeah, good question from Jim. Absolutely. So there's a couple of different things that we can do. First of all, it's definitely a thing. You want to control that variable as much as possible. And in fact, that's something for multiple reasons you want to talk about early on in the process. Like, how are we going to review this thing? And, like that can range from if you have a space and, like we're for the moment not in the throes of a global pandemic and we feel like we can safely get together in person, then that becomes easy. If we can all sit in one room and look at the same image and agree on it there, that's great. If that's not going to be the case, there are other options. But let's just kind of look at like the bookends here. So obviously the ideal in terms of the easiest time of all agreeing on what we're seeing and what it looks like and whether or not it's done, that's going to be all of us sitting in one room looking at one image, right? That's the ideal there. Everything else is going to be a compromise from there. What's the other end of that? The other end of that is, hey, here's the review link. Let me know what you think. I have no idea if you're watching this on your iPhone on a park bench at noon, or if you're like in your bathroom at 4 a.m. Like, I've got no clue how you're looking at this and in what environment you're viewing it on, and I've got no clue about like color management or any of the other things that can influence what you saw on your reference monitor compared to what that client is going to look at. So if we think about that other extreme end of things, that can happen for sure. That happens with me with clients all the time. I have clients who I know they're just looking at this like on their MacBook. I usually will at least ask like, hey, what are you looking at this on? I want to at least know how far afield of calibrated bullseye reference we are, because that's going to help me with the following, where I will actually explicitly say again in this initial negotiation, like, hey, my goal as we're working through this grade is going to be to get into finer and finer details. And I want to ask you, as we get into those finer details and you're seeing that it needs a touch more green, or you feel like, oh, it's just a little bit overly contrasty, who are we going to trust to arbitrate that? If you're looking at it on your laptop, you're going to have to surrender to me and trust me a bit more than if we're all sitting in one room together, not just to my eye, but to the instruments that I have at my disposal. So that's again something I will explicitly discuss up front. Like, hey, you can only review on your laptop via a Frame IO link or whatever. That's cool. I get it. I can give you great work that's going to hold up in that environment just the way it'll hold up when we actually deliver it for the web or wherever it's going. But what that probably does mean is you're going to need to trust me, especially as we get deeper into the process. You're going to need to trust me more than you trust your own eyes, that like, if you're saying it needs like, 0.5% less green, that's probably too fine a detail for you to assess on your end. And then it's probably something you're going to have to either trust me at, it's probably going to have to be more a question of like, hey, does this look a little bit green to you? And then I can say, yeah, it actually does look a little bit green. Let me pull some of that back. Or I might say, I got to tell you, on my instruments and on my calibrated display, it looks really, really good. And at that point, ideally, you, my client, are going to say, okay, go with what you see and go with your experience there. So that's something else, that's kind of how I like to deal with that far outer edge case of like, who the hell knows what you're looking at this on and how accurate it is. Somewhere in between, there are kind of 2 points in between that we can use there. One is to use my web viewing transform, which is a free download, and to do either a Frame IO or a private YouTube upload, so that you at least know that you're preserving what came out of your Resolve. That's going to be one extra bit of control that you can employ. So maybe that's a click better than just exporting it and letting it do whatever the hell it's going to do. And then the next thing you can do up from there, which Jem mentioned and I do for my business, is you actually can have a calibrated iPad. So I have a couple of calibrated iPads at this point that I have taken to my calibrator, and we've actually profiled them end to end. So I will send patches down the line from my Resolve, like line level out, over, in my case, the Zoom feed, and we will load up that feed on each of those iPads and measure the performance and profile what's happening, and then generate a LUT that back on my side in Zoom, I apply only to that outgoing feed, only to that feed that's going to that client. And that's a really good hybrid. That's like the next best thing from all being in one room together is I say, hey, like keep an eye in the mail. You're going to have to sign for this iPad tomorrow or in 3 days or whatever. And when you get it, here's instructions on how to open it up. Here's the passcode, all that good junk. Just open up the Zoom meeting. It's already been saved in there. And when you do, you're going to see an image that is very, very close to what I'm seeing in my room. That's kind of the ideal. Requires a bit more expense and a bit more planning, but boy, is it worth it for clients that care about the details of the image but can't be with you physically. That's by far my next best choice from there, and I think that's really should be everyone's next best choice, is whatever the particulars are of it, that you're actually sending a display that you know to be calibrated and sending a signal via a pipe that you have calibrated it on, so you have very, very high confidence that what they are seeing is very, very close to what you are seeing.
Christian is asking, what software can you use between Resolve and Zoom to apply that look or that calibration?
So I actually use hardware to do that. I have a separate feed that I am using. Like if you think about the signal flow of it, basically my image goes out via my breakout box to my actual or my IO box, whatever you want to call it, to my reference monitor. A separate sort of fork of that output is going into a box where I can apply a LUT. That LUT box is then looping back into my IO where I can input back into Zoom. And so in Zoom, I am inputting that feed with the display LUT applied back in as like a what do you call it? It's not like a screen share. It's like a camera feed is what Zoom thinks it is. It thinks it's a camera. In fact, it's just a line level HDMI signal that I'm feeding back. That's basically exactly what I'm looking at on my monitor, plus that calibration LUT that's only going out over that fork and being applied to, as a result, being applied to the image that gets shown on the other end of that Zoom on that calibrated iPad.
A lot of iPad questions or iPad interest. One Cower is wondering what settings are used on the iPad to change the screen profile.
None at all. It's set to, well, I shouldn't say none at all. There's a preset for setting the peak luminance to about 100 nits. So part of like the sort of package or set of instructions that I'll give to my clients is like, all right, let's make sure you're in a room where there's, at a bare minimum, no light source directly hitting your eyes or directly hitting the screen. That's a great start. If possible, let's try to get the surround level somewhat subdued so that even if it's not directly hitting you, there's just not a massive wash of daylight or tungsten light in general in the room, kind of get the light level down. And then there's a simple preset on those iPads that go out that sets the screen brightness to 100 nit as profiled. That's the one thing that happens on that iPad. Other than that, all of the transformation or the preparation of the image for that iPad's character, that's happening in that LUT that I just mentioned. So I am sort of pre-compensating for what the iPad is going to do that is not accurate to Rec 7 or 9. I'm pre-compensating for that on my side and then sending that pre-compensated signal out over Zoom to that iPad, if that makes sense. So there's no LUT or correction on the iPad itself. It's happening in the signal that gets sent out to that iPad.
Okay. Going back to the idea of getting clients and the initial emails, Joel is asking, instead of waiting for an email, do you do any outreach for clients? What's the best way to be noticed, and when do you close the sale and decide what you're charging for your work?
Yeah, really good questions. So I can only answer for myself, and I'll preface this by saying I know a number of colorists and other filmmakers and business people in general who are really good at kind of proactively seeking out and closing business. And I have so much respect. Actually, like my brother is one of those people. My brother and my dad, they're both in sales. And they're just natural. They're not explicitly in sales, but they're very good at connecting organically with people and, like creating a relationship that leads to a business relationship. One of the things you're going to find as you're working your way through your career is you're going to figure out what works best for you. And I found what works best for me is to put myself in a position to be noticed and then to wait for those phone calls and emails to come in. It feels kind of maddeningly passive sometimes, especially when things get quiet. But that's, for me, been the best strategy, where I'm simply going to do what I can to be easy to find, easy to spot, easy to notice. But then I'm going to wait for those things to come to me, generally speaking. So that's, like I said, sort of maddeningly inactive, and it can be a real exercise in sort of patience to do it that way. And that may not be for you, but that's proven to be a really, really good sort of posture for me to adopt. And let's think about the other portions of the questions there. So, sorry, I'm just going to pull up Joel's question because there was multiple parts here. Do me a favor, just read it back to me again there, Gadali. Oh, never mind. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I got it right here. So what's the best way to be noticed, and when do you close the sale and decide what you're charging for your work? So again, I'm going to give like sort of an answer that sounds like a tease, but it really is my honest answer. The best way to be noticed is to be the very best at what you do, the best you can be at what you do, and then to just let that shine and let it be evident. So when you do work you're proud of, put it up on social media. And, like, I'll be the first to admit I'm actually not the best example of this. I kind of have my own slightly unusual route because I have my education and my YouTube here that I do with you guys, and that ends up becoming a lot of the way that my public profile sort of finds its way out into the spheres that I want it to. But regardless, like of my specific case, I think the ideal is to get the best to like reach your full potential and then let that shine and trust that it's going to be noticed sooner or later, because that's going to be more than that. You want to like blow right past, how do I get them to notice me, or them to notice me, or all of them to notice me? Just be like, how do I shine massively? How do I cultivate such an incredible practice that people just can't miss it? They keep stumbling over it every time they try to move left or right. That would be kind of my advice there. And then for the final part of the question, when do you close the sale and decide what you're charging for your work? I think that comes down to the negotiation, and it comes down to getting clear in your own mind. Like, I'll answer pretty early on in my mind the sort of first question that helps me decide how much I'm willing to take, how much I'm willing to compromise financially or not. And that's kind of goes back to the one for the meal or the one for the real thing in broad terms. Like, all right, if this is just a job, if I'm never going to want to put this material on my reel, and you're going to look at it, as soon as you look at a rough cut, you're going to be like, hey, it's not even that it has to be bad, but you're going to look at stuff and be like, this is fine. This looks really nice, but it's not anything that I'm ever going to put on my reel because of something else that we've talked about before. Your reel should not represent the work you've done. Your reel should represent the work that you want to do. So if that happens to be one shot, that's cool. Make your reel one shot, but don't make a reel that shows your history. Make a reel that shows your future. Okay. So if you're observing that idea, you're going to look at a piece of material and very quickly go like, oh, that's awesome. I would love to have that on my reel. Or you're going to go, nah, it's fine. It looks great, but it's just not it's not going to help me with my reel. If it's not going to help you with your reel, if it's just a gig, if it's just a job, you can still have a great time doing that and being able to get excited and get passionate and give your best work to those jobs and not just the ones that you find to be particularly compelling for your reel. That's the gig. Of course, you got to be able to do that, and you'll be able to do that. But that does shape the negotiation. That's one less thing that, even though it's implicit, that's one less thing that this job is offering you, right? So what's left? Well, there's money, of course. And then, you can think about other non-monetary terms as well. It's one of the ones that we talk about a lot here on the channel is like, well, if you're trying to get a deal from me, if I want, $2,000 and you can only offer me $1,000, it's like, well, let's start negotiating for the non-monetary items. And one of the big ones there is going to be, well, can you get me the prep in the way that's going to make my life as easy as possible? Because as you guys know, and as we've talked about, depending on how something is prepped, My prep for your project, for the same project, can take 5 minutes or it can take 5 hours. Just depends on how it's brought in. So especially when people are aggressively trying to, chisel me down on my rate, that'll be kind of one of the first things I go to is like, well, I think we might be able to work that out if you're willing to learn some new stuff and make my life easy. And what that looks like in its easiest form is like, you're going to have to bring it into Resolve, like do the whole conform for me. You don't know Resolve? Okay, go learn it. Like, if you're really trying to get a deal, then hopefully you're motivated to spend the hour that it's going to take you to learn Resolve and to prep what I'm asking you for in Resolve, and then literally give me a DRT and the associated media. If you give me that, and then you follow the other sort of detailed instructions that I give in my prep sheet that I'm going to create for you guys and share for you in my comprehensive color course in June, if you do that, the prep can literally be done in 5 minutes. And there's also a good sort of built-in safety net that I will put in place at this initial juncture and say, and just so you know, if it doesn't happen to work perfectly the first time and I receive prep from you that isn't to the spec, no hard feelings. I'm not going to get mad, but I am going to say, hey, it looks like this wasn't quite done right. Let's have another go at it. I'm not going to just work my way through it, even though I asked for A and you gave me B. I'm going to insist that you give me A, and then I'm going to hold you to that. And if we can do that, that's a big negotiating point for me, because that's time that I don't have to spend myself or spend, or money that I don't have to spend on an assistant or someone to conform things in for me. So that's one of many non-monetary terms that you can contemplate. And you can go further with it. Like one of the ones that is sort of peculiar or particular to my lane, but maybe is applicable for some of you guys as well. You could go even further with, well, hey, what can I do with this material? Like, what if you wanted to do a more extensive piece of social media that says like, hey, here's how I built this grade. And maybe it starts with showing the log version of the image. That wouldn't be cool to just do without telling your client, of course, right? But maybe that's something you can negotiate for and say, hey, I'd love to do like a bigger grading breakdown, especially if it's like something you are into for your reel. Do a big grading breakdown and be like, hey, would you mind if I did a grading breakdown that starts with the raw ungraded image? And again, if they're serious about working out a deal with you, they will be willing to meet you and compromise and negotiate on some of those non-monetary items. And that can be a really valuable thing to you if that's a piece of work that really helps you to grow and promote your business after it's a wrap. Those are just a couple of examples of the things that you can negotiate for in addition to money. But all that said, you're going to have to kind of in your own mind have a list of like, all right, here's what I could potentially get out of it. Maybe that's money. Maybe that's a good piece for my reel. Maybe that's some marketing material for my company. Maybe it's some visibility. That's another one we didn't talk about yet. But if it's going to be seen at this film festival or debuted at this outlet where you know it's going to have traction, that's another value prop because your name and your work are going to be out there. So you're going to inventory in your own mind. Here are the things that I might get out of this. And then it's just a question of negotiating for what they actually are willing to offer you from each of those categories and weighing it in your own mind of like, all right, is this good for my business or is it not? And I think the last thought on that I would give is, again, something I've mentioned in the past. You should have a minimum number for your rate. You should have a number that you really don't go below. You don't have to share that number, and that number can be way, way, way below the first number that you will quote out. But you should have a minimum number that you've arrived at by doing some math, and it's a number that you know in your mind, if I take less than this number, I am actually losing money because there's a certain amount of money that it requires, even if you're running a super small business or if you're just an independent contractor working for yourself, there's a certain amount of money that you need to be billing in an hour in order for, like 160 of your hours in a month, assuming you work every hour of every day of every week, which isn't going to happen. But even assuming that you do, if you take less than this amount of money, you're not going to be able to pay your bills, are you? You're not going to be able to keep the lights on. You're not going to be able to upgrade your gear. You're not going to be able to do any of the things that are directly or indirectly associated with your business. So you should know that number. That number might be way less than the number that you quote to your clients, but you should know that number, and that should just be, kind of like a highway bumper that you're aware of, so that if someone really tries to grind you into the dirt, you can at least say, well, here's what I can do for you. Let's say everything about it you love. You love the people, you love the work. It's going on your reel. It's premiering at this film festival. It's a big name client who's either going places or already is a really established name, you love everything about it except for the money, you can at least have that number in your mind and say, I got to tell you, this is super exciting. I'd love to work with you. However, I cannot do this for less than X. And you can even tell them why if they ask, but you should have that number in your mind. So lots of thoughts and ideas there, but hope that's some helpful ones.
All right. Post Color Gear is asking, have you been told by any clients that they have come to notice you from watching this YouTube channel?
I sure have. Yeah. There are, it's funny. I'll give you guys a bit of history on me. I actually, like a lot of colorists, I came to color grading from another area of post-production. I was an editor for a long while. And way back when I was like in college and, trying to scrape together beer money and, money for gas for my little like Honda Metropolitan moped that I used to get up to campus and stuff, I would teach editing. I would put it up on Craigslist and be like, hey, I'll teach you Final Cut Pro. It was like Final Cut Pro 7 at the time. I'll teach you editing. It's $25 an hour. It's a 2-hour minimum. I'm going to come over and for 2 hours, I'll teach you whatever you want to know about editing. And I was able to, kind of make some extra pocket change doing that. But you'd be amazed when I began my editing career kind of after college, there were, and even during college, I guess I should say, a ton of those clients who had initially engaged me for teaching or who thought they wanted to learn how to edit, they would sit with me for one session. And hopefully this doesn't speak to how to me being a terrible teacher, but they would sit with me for one session and they would go like, you know what, can I just pay you to do this? Like, I thought I wanted to, but seeing you do it, I'm like, I don't think I do. So again, that might just be because I'm not that great of a teacher, but there was always a big crossover there. And I think kind of the same thing happens with YouTube. Like some of you guys, a lot of you guys who are here with me, you're in it. You're here to grade. But there are plenty of other people who like get on YouTube and they're like, I think I want to learn how to grade images better in Resolve. And some of them find their way to my channel, and some of those look at what I'm doing or get a better sense of what the task or the craft involves, and they go, oh, geez, never mind. I'd rather pay for it. I know I do that all the time in my life. I'm like, I feel like I'd like to, I don't know, like, I'd like to be an open effects developer. That's one that I've been sort of romancing, like me personally, for like 6 months. And then once I actually really started getting into it in earnest and going like, all right, what's it going to take to do this? That was 100% my conclusion. I'm like, oh, never mind. I'd rather pay someone for this than do it. So I do get a certain amount of those from YouTube. Yeah.
Okay. Finishing or a workflow question here. Kushik is asking, if I use a Resolve Film Look LUT for an SDR master, then I want to master for theater, what should I do? Is that replacing the 709 LUT with the DCI P3 LUT?
That's a good question. I think so. I don't actually know for sure. I've never done that before. Let's do a quick experiment. Let's find out. So let's go over here to Resolve. And what I'm going to hope is that, like these Film Looks LUTs are kind of guilty of a crime that I've indicted many times here on the channel, which is like they have missing or incomplete information about what they are. So I know just from experience, like, okay, this guy says Rec 709 Kodak 2383 D65. I know from experience what that means is this is a LUT which is built off of the measured behavior of a film print, which expects an image in a film negative state, like meaning with that encoding curve and with whatever those nebulous primaries are, that color space, and it is going to return a Rec 709 image with a D65 white point. I just know that from having figured it out, as opposed to anything that's super explicitly stated in the name of the LUT or in the metadata of the LUT. Although actually, I take it back. I think I found out recently there's a little bit more info than I initially gave these credit for. If you open this in Sublime Text, it'll actually tell you, okay, well, at least I know it's a Cineon log input. That doesn't do me many favors for a color space because Cineon is just a tone curve, but at least I know it's expecting Cineon input. And it's letting me know, okay, I'm going to output Rec 709 Gamma 24. So now that I've actually remembered this, probably the easiest way to answer the question would be to look at one of the DCIs. Let's look at the exact same Kodak 2383 D65 for this DCI P3 variation and see what we can learn from the text file. DCI P3 Gamma 26. We're in business. What I was hoping would be the case is the case, which is that this is set up exactly for that use case of actually being targeting a theatrical projector. So yes, that would be precisely what you could do there, and that's kind of the one exception to a big shortcoming that I've griped about a bunch here on the channel of like, okay, great, you grade the best looking movie in the world underneath Rec 709 Kodak 2383 D65, but now you need to do something else. What the hell are you going to do? Well, the one place where you have a potential answer is if you're doing a theatrical master. We now know from having made a explicit exploration just now, okay, I can actually target P3 Gamma 26, and this is, again, as I said, not something I've actually done, but my expectation and my reasonably high confidence would be that if I grade under this on my Rec 709 monitor, and then I swap it out for this when I'm viewing it in a theater, I should be getting a pretty faithful match from one display or reproduction to another, minus the other things that come into play, like, wow, it's a hell of a lot darker in here, and things feel different when they're that big, and reflected light feels different than emitted light. There's all those kind of things that you can't control for in a viewing transform, but other than those pieces, you should be getting a reasonably good match between what you saw on your Rec 709 reference monitor and what you're now seeing in your theatrical grading environment.
All right, question from Shady on the Block here. At what point did you realize you no longer have to book jobs solely to have something for your reel?
I'm going to be totally honest with you. I don't think I'm there even now. There are jobs, there are clients that if I hear from them today, that I would go make them big enough. And if I hear from them today, I'm going to have trouble following my own advice from earlier of like getting overexcited and just saying yes, because I want it so bad for my reel. And I know that, just that shot of that actor, or just, the association of having worked with that director, I feel like that's really going to do something for my business and for my career. And for that reason, I'm going to leap at the opportunity and sort of have trouble being disciplined and saying, sounds interesting, we should discuss. Let's build a really good deal together. So I feel like I'm still at that same point. It's just a question of like the jobs that come in having, like, I've got a higher and higher sort of threshold for jobs that I'm gonna be really, really compelled by simply because of who they are and what they're doing. And here's the fun thing about this business, guys. Those jobs at this point, any of those jobs that I'm talking about for me, if they come calling, none of them are going to come calling looking for a favor. They're going to come calling with money in hand. They may not have a gazillion dollars, but they're going to be able to pay me a healthy budget. So that's the other sort of like nice thing about the way this business progresses is you're always going to be hungry for a bigger, better thing for your reel, or for something that rounds it out or demonstrates an area of, or a genre that you really want to be moving into with your business. That's always going to be a thing. But that trade-off of like, it's pretty good for my reel, but gosh, they have no money and they want it too soon or whatever. Like those trade-offs become less and less extreme, and you get to a point where you're like, okay, that's, it. Like I said, if those clients or jobs that I'm talking about that I would find really mouthwatering, if those come in tomorrow, I'm not going to have to say, well, even though you got no money, I guess I'll take it because I just can't turn you down. They're going to be kind of positive on all of those fronts. And like I said, it may be for me that there are less and less of those jobs that I'm like that strongly compelled by. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I don't know. But that's really the only difference. There's still those jobs and clients. I can envision them. I can envision 10 of them right now that I'm going to be like, yeah, I mean, let's find a way to do this because I want to work with you. But the list just, your standards get higher and the list gets smaller as your career goes on.
Okay, question from Nicholas here. Should I charge more for grading HDR or should I consider charging the same as SDR?
You should just charge more, man. Like you're not. This is something that I'm really passionate about. You know, like there's the hardware investment of HDR, which I get, which like maybe there's a logic to saying, well, since you're my HDR client, I'm going to put all the burden of like offsetting my additional hardware costs on you as opposed to distributing them over my billing or my rate for all of my clients. So you could make that case that that's why you should charge more for HDR than SDR. My feeling from a creative point of view is I don't like my rates to be based on gear. I like my rates to be based on me, and I don't like to make a distinct. I don't like to take more money from client A than from client B simply because they're asking for a different delivery spec. That's really all HDR is at the end of the day. As much as compelling as I think it is, and as excited as I am to be doing more and more HDR, all it is at the end of the day is a delivery spec. And I don't really. That's again, this is very personal for me. And if you're running on a different model or you're running a bigger facility or whatever, your answers may vary. But for me, I don't want to take money for. I want to take money because you wanted to work with me and because you're getting you feel like you're getting a ton of value out of working with me, and what you're paying for when you work with me is my craft or my like sort of take on your images. I want to lump as much of what you spend into that category as possible and as little as possible into like, well, we did the HDR, so I got to upsell you. So my answer would be you should just charge more across the board. If you're capable of doing HDR and SDR, there's a good chance that like that probably means you're color managing. That probably means you're a pretty accomplished and advanced artist with something to offer. And the truth is, like, how do I put this? Like I said, I love HDR, and there's more creative possibility with HDR than SDR, but you're not getting less of my creativity with the SDR, right? You're just getting, we're just targeting the character of a different display when we do that. So all that for me says like, well, why would I charge less for SDR than HDR? I'm doing the same valuable thing. And if I've had to invest in hardware in order to service those HDR clients, then I'd rather incorporate that into the overhead that gets accounted for in my hourly rate across the board, as opposed to sort of partitioning out my first and second class sort of citizens or first and second class tiers of clientele, if that makes sense.
Question from Ismail around trim pass. He's wondering, what's your favorite workflow for a trim pass for P3 to 709, for example? I'm working on a node-based ACES project in groups, and I'm wondering what the best way to handle it is.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll be honest. I go back and forth on that a lot. Like, the most common scenario that I've done trim passes in is HDR SDR as opposed to like theatrical 709. I'll be like most of the time, I've never graded a film in a theater. I've reviewed in a theater before, but I've never graded in a theater. So when I do a theatrical deliverable, the way that works is we master 709, and then we're going to make a transform into P3 Gamma 2.6 for the DCP, and then I'm going to proof that in the theater with the client and make sure that it's doing exactly what it should be doing. So that's less applicable here than trim passes for HDR and SDR, which I've done a ton of. And I go back and forth. A part of me is like, well, if you can make it look good in SDR, then HDR is easy, especially if you've got a really good pipeline and without even having had to look at it, that you're appropriately sculpting those highlights that can get really wild and pingy and out of control in HDR. And part of me goes like, well, if we think about an analogy I've made with you guys before, like, okay, this is one of the trickiest parts about color grading and like about contemporary color grading is like, okay, I have my reference monitor over here to the right now. Okay. And let's say I pull up one of the jobs that I'm working on after we finish our session today, and I play it down on my monitor. I'm actually not seeing my image. And same thought exercise. If I play it down, if I go and grab an X300, an HDR monitor, and I replace my reference monitor with that, and I play it down, still not seeing my image. My image is the interior of a building, and my reference monitors are windows that I can use to peer into that building. And depending on the reference monitor, that can be a really big window that I get a pretty good view inside with, or it can be a really narrow window where it's like, well, whatever you can see through there, I guess you can see. So the point that I'm making there is in that, if we think about it that way, I'd rather make my creative decisions with as grand and large a view into my image as I can possibly get, which would be HDR, right? So that's kind of the other way that I tend to think about it, is like, I'd rather make those decisions there. And then when I get narrowed down to that little peephole, simply make sure that I'm giving the person who's got that vantage into the image as good an experience as I possibly can, getting them as close a match to what I saw when I had that bigger window into the image, as close a match to that as I possibly can. So I go back and forth, and I think it's something that's worth doing both ways at least once. But in general, like with color management, as we've talked about before, there's no real tricks or tips to it beyond that. You should be swapping one output transform aimed explicitly at the display you're mastering for another output transform for the display that you're explicitly mastering for, assuming you're not doing like a Dolby Vision thing, which, like I've done as well. Dolby Vision, I prefer to keep simpler rather than more complex. I'll actually often not do shot level trims except where necessary. So literally just have one sort of stock analysis set of metadata from in the Dolby Vision that sort of carries across multiple shots or scenes, and then only like tackle and adjust individual shots where I'm like, wow, that one really particularly traveled poorly from HDR to SDR, and I need to open up the shadows or add a little bit more color in the top end or whatever. But kind of make that the exception as opposed to the rule. So lots of thoughts and ideas on trim passes, and again, that's all going to be more pursuant to HDR versus SDR trim passes as opposed to like theatrical versus 709, although those same concepts will certainly apply in that case as well for the most part. And my goodness, we're almost at quitting time here, but let's try to hit a couple more.
Okay, question from Justin, a couple of questions. Do you have a recommended framework for pricing out jobs, and do you bill hourly or on a general per job basis?
Yeah, good question. So framework for pricing out jobs, what I would refer you to there is a really good article that Katie Hinson wrote for mixinglight.com recently, where she breaks down sort of how to calculate your rate. It's way more scientific even than, frankly, I've ever been before. And when I read it, I was like, wow, I just learned a thing or two. I got to go take a fresh look at my rates. So I definitely recommend checking that out. It's really well done. And then on the other question, which has flown right out of my mind, hit me with that one again there, Gadali, the second part.
Do you bill hourly or per project?
Right. Yeah. So definitely bill hourly. You got to keep your clients honest. If you don't bill hourly, then you're going to end up like, if it's no different to take 20 hours of your time than 10, they're going to take the 20. You got to keep things honest and on a reasonable metric. So typically the way I'll do things is I will do a set number of hours, which guarantees a set number of passes, if that makes sense. So there's a little bit of accountability on both sides, where in the same way I'm saying, hey, like I can do this in 10 hours. If you decide you want 20, we're going to have to talk about that. That's outside the scope of what we're agreeing to right now. At the same time, if I accompany, I can do this in 10 hours with saying I can get through, if I kind of guarantee I can get through 3 passes and address your notes within that first 10 hours, that means that in the same way I'm expecting them not to come back and say, hey, I want you to give me 10 more hours for free. They should also be able to reasonably expect that I don't say, hey, you know how I said we could grade your whole movie in 10 hours? I just hit 10 hours and I've still got to grade the back half of the movie, and you got to just open your checkbook for me. Like, that's not fair either. So I'll tend to guarantee, hey, look, if you allow me to sort of set the tempo and let me nudge us forward if need be, then I can guarantee you we're going to get your, like if it's a feature, we're going to get your feature done in 30 hours. I guarantee you we will get it done. It will look great. If there's notes that go beyond that 30 hours or you want to do more stuff, we can hit those notes. It's just that we are going to bill hourly for that time. So that's kind of the way I structure that. Definitely bill hourly, but put in a baked-in guarantee that says, as long as you are allowing me to drive the show a little bit, I guarantee we will get it done in this number of hours that I've quoted you. And if we need to go beyond that, then we'll bill that out a la carte. I think that's a really good hybrid model so that they're accountable for your time and you're accountable for what you commit to at the beginning of the process.
Okay, and question from Rafa. What would be your first tier of materials to buy, like first panel and a first monitor, and where to go from there?
Yeah, good, really good question to ask, and something again, much like the finer nuances of the question that we just answered a moment ago, all stuff that we're going to cover in detail in this comprehensive course in June. But off the top of the dome, what I would recommend if you're really talking about, like what they call in other industries, the MVP, minimum viable product, if you're just talking about getting like, all right, what's the minimum stuff that I need in order to say I'm a professional colorist and not feel like I'm lying to people and feel like I've got the tools to actually do that work. The first thing, most important thing is going to be your image. You need a way to deliver an image that was graded with a calibrated display. So probably the cheapest way to do that is going to be to look at getting like an LG OLED, like consumer TV, and have it calibrated. And I'm actually curious on that note, who here is like confused or would like to know more about calibration and would like to have a better solution for calibration that's cost effective? We've talked about it a little bit here on the channel, but I'm curious to hear that because that will help me with something that I'm considering incorporating into this with how much of that to include in what we're doing in this course in June, because I want to equip you guys in that front as well. But that would be number one. Get a reference monitor that has a trustworthy image. That's probably, in terms of most cost effective, going to be an LG OLED, like a 55 inch or something that you have calibrated to Rec 7 or 9. Okay. Get a machine that is reasonably powerful. If any of you guys watched the fun little brief interview that Darren and I did on his channel a week or so ago, you saw my setup. It's pretty humble. I have an iMac Pro, and I've got some heavier artillery in the back if I need to break it out for bigger jobs. But 90% of the time, I'm using that iMac Pro, and it does a great job. So you don't need to get like some custom HP Z840 workstation with 800 GPUs in there to get the job done. Just get a reasonably powerful machine with that's like stable and has a decent amount of like RAM and processor power, and also stuff that we'll have recommendations for coming up as we get closer to the course. That's sort of like your next thing. In terms of a panel, panels are nice. Panels are kind of more about speed than they are about like, it's not like you can't do great work with your tablet. I talked about this with Darren actually in that same video as well. I do a ton of grading with my pen. And for me personally, the way that I grade and my like facility with the pen, I'm really darn fast with that thing. So like, I wouldn't want to give up my little mini panel here, but I wouldn't say that would like chop my efficiency in half or anything like that. So I'd say when you're ready, probably skip the micro panel. That would just be my personal thing. I think that's like kind of an awkward trade-off of cost benefit. Hold out, get the mini panel when you're ready, when you can get jobs to pay for it. Don't buy it out of pocket if you can avoid it. Don't buy anything out of pocket if you can. Get your business to pay for these things. So when you have your first good month and you can do it, go buy the mini panel or whatever. The one thing that I would really prioritize investing in is a good calibrated image. And then make sure that you've got a space you can work in where there's not a bunch of ambient light leaking in there. So again, you can have a meaningful image that you're making your creative decisions with so that your clients are getting the work that they're entitled to when they're paying you for it. Focus on that stuff. And then You can add those other things as they come along. A control surface is a good one. A reasonably powerful computer is a good one. A good, like piece of external storage is a good one. The list can go on, and this business can eat up your cash really fast. But invest in those things, as the needs make themselves known and as work starts to flow and as you can build them to your business. You don't want to be, like I'll be honest with you guys, when I like got into color grading in earnest for the first time, back in, however long ago it's been, a decade plus now, I got super excited and I had a little bit of cash to spare and I went out and way overextended myself. I bought way too much stuff. And I was fortunate that, the work ended up kind of flowing as a result, but the work would have flowed anyway. And it would have been a lot less stressful if I'd sort of invested in that stuff in pieces as opposed to outlaying that huge sum of cash, what to me at the time was a huge sum of cash, and just crossing my fingers that it would all work out. It did in my case, but I wouldn't repeat it that way for sure. So I hope that's helpful there. And I know we're running over a little bit. Let's do one more if we've got a good one.
Okay. Let's see. Question from Santiago. How do you manage final deliverables? And do you ever offer DCP creation or archive masters?
Yeah, really good question. So again, I'll kind of put the caveat that this is particular to me and not like something that I when I tell you how I do it, I'm not telling you, oh, this is the only way to do it, or it would be dumb to do it any other way. This is just the way that I do it. I keep it very like simple with deliverables. I've done DCP creation in the past and have had the tools in place for that. I kind of got out of that business just because, again, for my model as a, like a boutique post facility, I want to charge for creativity. I don't want to charge for all the stuff that can come with that, even though that stuff can be lucrative and there can be good margins on that stuff in terms of like your business. And if you have a good head for those things and you enjoy them, we're going to talk about that again in our course in June. That's something that you probably should be offering as a part of your business because it's a solution that some clients are going to want. For me, my delivery really just comes down to one of two forms. It's either a strung out QuickTime of the entire timeline, or most commonly, it's a set of rendered clips with like 24 frame handles and an XML that the online editor or the finisher or whomever can use to rebuild their edit with my like graded media and create the final deliverables from there. That's kind of the scope of what I deliver personally. And as you guys know, on a lot of the larger jobs that I do, I tend to partner with a post facility or I will get brought on by a post facility. So there are absolutely jobs where that would not be sufficient. And if I weren't able to facilitate more than that, I wouldn't be able to do that level of work. But for the work that I do, not in partnership with a facility, just here at the in my space, that's the way that it looks for me. Is it's like, hey, I'm going to give you graded media that you can rebuild into an XML. I won't do final deliverables. I won't do a DCP. I have like partners who, even in the case of like, let's say I'm doing a film out of my space here and they need a DCP. I have good relationships with a couple of different people who can do a good job, or a couple of different vendors who can do a good job of that, who I will recommend them to. But my personal approach is not to handle it, just because I love I love getting to focus on the creative, and I find it to be really low stress to like that's what I know I can do well. I know I can nail every single one of those details every single time. And the details of some of those other more exotic deliverables are a little nauseating to contemplate getting 100% right 100% of the time. Again, that's just me personally. I also don't have as much of a like appetite for that stuff. But if you like working with computers, if you feel like you've got a good grasp on that stuff, you probably should consider offering those things, because you can probably add a good sort of like lane to your business by doing so. And that's all I have to say about that. That was a great session, guys. I feel like we could have gone even further into, like prep and the actual grade on the back end, but we ended up touching on, I think, a lot of, best practices for making the initial deal when the call comes in to do a grade, and the way that you receive your prep and your turnover. We talked about a DRT and associated media being by far the easiest way that someone can give you a job, and that being a great bargaining chip when they're trying to get you to work for less than your rate. You can say, sure, can you make it so that I don't have to do as much on the prep side? So we ended up covering a lot of that, and this last question about delivery as well, a good thing to discuss, and we can talk about reviews and sort of the process of actually doing the grade as well in future episodes. But we covered a lot of ground today, and I'm, as always, very happy to be spending my Friday morning with you guys and hanging out. I'm trying to think if I have anything else left to announce. I think you guys know it all. You know the whole story. I hope you all have a really awesome weekend, a really good next week, a good week next week. I promise there's a new video coming next week. I'm actually really excited about this one. It's a brand new sort of like type of video that I haven't done before, and I'm very curious to hear everyone's thoughts. So I've been slacking on that as I juggle all the other stuff I've got going on, but that's coming this week for real. And I'm really excited to hear everyone's thoughts on this kind of new format and for all of you guys to check it out. In the meanwhile, thank you all very much for joining me. Thanks to Gadali for co-hosting with me. Everyone have an awesome weekend, an awesome week, and I will see you next week for grade school on Friday. Bye-bye.